This is part 1 of the makerslide.co.za CNC machine assembly. When this arrived, you can see everything is pretty well packed and wrapped up. All the aluminium extrusions are wrapped in bubble wrap, and there are various components that come in boxes. Everything is very well packaged. Just the one thing I noticed is that there are no labels or instructions included. So this is why I'm putting together this tutorial that will consist of a number of parts. We will be covering putting together the machine, the electronics and the motors, and also go into the software and how to set it up to make the machine work. So let's start with putting this machine together. To tap the extrusions, you will need a M5 tap and some oil, something like Q20, that will help lubricate the extrusion and the tap as you are creating the thread in the end of the extrusion. Now so the tap's not included in the kit, so you'll need to actually buy it. And I got a tap set from Ardendorf Machinery Mart. You can go to the website ardendorf.co.za, and I bought a tap and die set. I think it's a 40-piece tap and die set. I'll put a link to the website in the description. So cutting the thread into the end of the extrusions is probably one of the more tedious tasks of this build, and that's why I opted to do it first before assembling any of the other parts. So you will see at the end of each extrusion on either end, you have on both ends you have holes, and you're going to use a M5 tap to cut a thread into each one of those holes, and try and cut the thread as deep as you can, using the entire length of the cutting surface on the tap. To assemble the Y-axis gantry plates, you are going to need a number 4 or 4 millimeter Allen key and a number 8 spanner. The Y-axis has 2 gantry plates, and they are going to be a mirror of each other. You can see from this one that I've assembled already, we are going to mirror that onto this one here. We will start with the top 2 holes. You're going to take a 30 millimeter bolt, push it through the hole. You're going to use a shim, the wheel, another shim, and your M5 bolt.
So you don't want to over tighten this, just so that it grips like that. And we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. 30mm bolt, shim the wheel, another shim, and M5 nut. Don't over tighten. So the wheels must just run smoothly. Right, on the bottom two holes of the plate, we are going to use I think it's a 35mm bolt. We're going to use this eccentric spacer. What I normally like to do with the eccentric spacer, you will see that on the bottom of the spacer is a little mark. What I like to do is, it's a little dimple that's in there. So that will show you later on when we are going to adjust this eccentric spacer where that mark is. So I just normally just like to mark it with a marker so that it's more clearly visible. Push your 35mm bolt through the spacer into the hole. You're going to use a shim, a wheel, shim, and your M5 bolt. Now, because we are going to adjust this one a little bit later, it's best not to over tighten this. You want to still be able to adjust the eccentric spacer at a later stage. So what I like to do is there where I've marked the line with the marker, just to turn it so that it's at the bottom of the plate. And again, we're going to mark that line up at the bottom, like that. Next, we are going to assemble the bearings that the belt will run on onto this plate. So you'll see we have a big hole here where the motor gets mounted, okay, with the motor mounts. And then we also have these two holes at the bottom there. We are going to take a 40mm bolt, push it through one of these holes from the outside. Then you have a spacer, you have a large washer, a smaller washer or shim, two bearings, another smaller washer, the large washer, and your M5 nut. Also, don't over tighten, just tighten enough so that it doesn't come loose. Your bearings must run free. And then we're going to do the same in that hole. Spacer, large washer, smaller washer, 2 bearings, small washer, larger washer, and your M5 lock nut. And now you have 2 gantry plates that are mirrored. We're going to be assembling the X-axis gantry plates. You get 2 of them, they look exactly the same. On this one you can already see that I've assembled these wheels. I'm going to show you how to do it on this one. They are mirrors of each other, but because the plates are exactly the same, it doesn't really matter which way you go around. So we'll start with these 2 holes. They will fit the wheels at the top. We are going to be using a 30mm bolt, and you will need a number 4 or 4mm Allen key and a number 8 spanner. Insert the bolt, use a shim, the wheel, another shim, and the M5 bolt, or sorry, M5 nut. No need to over tighten, just make sure it's sits secure and the wheel runs freely. We're going to do exactly the same on that hole. 30mm M5 bolt, shim, wheel, shim, and M5 nut. Towards the bottom of the plate we have 2 larger holes. This will be for the eccentric spacer. So as I've mentioned before, what I like to do is there's a little dimple or little line at the bottom of that spacer on the one side. I'm just going to mark that with a marker so that it's more clearly visible to me. Later on in the process. This is a 35mm M5 bolt. Push it through the eccentric spacer into the hole. So here you can see this hole's a little bit stiff. So I'm just going to push the eccentric spacer through. That's probably because of the epoxy coating on the plate. push through the bolt, take a shim, a wheel, another shim, and my M5 nut. You don't want to over tighten this because you still need to be able to move this eccentric nut. So the eccentric nut is just a nut that has a off-center hole, which allows the wheel to move up and down so that we can fine-tune it on the track. So I'm going to move my black line that I've made with a marker just to the bottom there. Once we've fitted this to the track, to the aluminium extrusion, we can then go ahead and tighten that when it's in the correct position, but we'll get to that later. Eccentric nut, bolt, shim, wheel, shim, M5 lock nut. And again, we move that black line to the bottom. Next, we want to assemble the bearings onto the plate, very similar to what we've done on the Y-axis plates. You'll see here's the hole for the motor. We have holes for mounting the motor, and right at the bottom there, in between these two wheels, we have holes where we will be mounting these bearings. You will need a 40mm bolt. It's going to go right through. You're going to need a spacer, a large washer, smaller washer or shim, 2 bearings, smaller washer, large washer, and your M5 bolt. Do not over tighten, just make sure that it's secure. And in that hole we will do exactly the same. Bolt, spacer, large washer, small washer, our 2 bearings, smaller washer, large washer, and the M5 lock nut. And then we have 2 gantry plates for this axis. Right, so the next thing to do would be to fit them together. So we will do that now. For this, you will need the supplied aluminium tubes that came with it, with the kit. You will also need the 76mm bolts, and then we also have a M10, I think it's an M8 actually, lock nut. So you will see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes. So you're going to, I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to push the bolt through. I'm going to take one of my large aluminium spacers, and a nut. So this is a number 10 spanner and a 5mm or number 5 Allen key, metric Allen key. So just tighten that slightly, don't over tighten. Actually I'm going to loosen it a little bit. We need a little bit of wiggle room so that we can get the rest of these spaces in. So there's the other hole. I'm going to push it through. It's going to come through the other side, hopefully. And we use a nut. And then lastly we have the 2 spaces at the top. Right, so I'm just going to tighten the bolts a little bit more, just so that the whole assembly doesn't wiggle around. At a later stage we'll come back to this and we will tighten these bolts properly once they are fitted onto the aluminium extrusion, the track. Right, there we go. This is the Z-axis mounting plate, and pre-mounted onto it is the lead screw nut, and we want to assemble the V-wheels on the same side as where this nut is assembled. So you'll see you'll have 2 larger holes on the corners on that side, and 2 smaller holes on the corners on this side. The larger holes will is where the eccentric screws go, and these ones are just the fixed wheels. We will start with these ones. You're going to need a M8 spanner, number 8 spanner, and a number 4 Allen key. We will need 40mm bolts, and we're going to start with a spacer, a wheel, another spacer, a large spacer. This spacer is 10mm. A washer or shim. We're going to insert it through the smaller hole and use a M5 nut to secure it. Again, we don't over tighten, just enough. So that the wheel will spin freely. And we do the same on this side. Bolt, shim, wheel, shim, 10mm spacer, another shim through the hole, M5 nut. So on the larger holes on these corners, that is where our eccentric nut goes. So as I've explained before in previous steps, there's a little line or dimple that runs across the bottom edge on that side, on one of the sides. I marked that with a marker. There's 2 of them. Eccentric nut is going to go into the hole over here, and I'm going to use the 45mm bolt. We will then use a shim, our 10mm spacer, another shim, a wheel, another shim, and a bolt. So again, not over tightening. Moving the mark towards the outside. So the last one, eccentric spacer. Our bolt. Shim. 10mm spacer. Shim. Wheel. Shim. And lock nut. And we're going to move our mark to the outside. Just going to tighten it a little bit more. Here we have the two router mounting clamps or brackets that we need to assemble onto the Z-axis plate. For that we are going to use 30mm M5 bolts and the M5 lock nuts. So you want to make sure that you get this mounting bracket perpendicular to the edge of the plate. You want to make sure that you fix these securely. As this will house the router. If it's not fixed securely, these bolts and nuts can come loose because of vibrations. So I'm just going to readjust this. It's not quite square. this can now go back onto the Z-axis extrusion. Next step in the process is to assemble the Y-axis assembly and fix that onto the X-axis gantry plates. For that we are going to need these small T-nuts. There are 4 of them, and we're also going to need these flathead Allen bolts. They are 9 millimeters long, and they are I think they're M5. So in the X-axis gantry assembly, you can see the slots top and bottom of this plate. They are on both sides because these plates are a mirror image of each other. However, we want to use the plate that does not have the bearing wheels attached to them. So we're going to assemble it onto this side. So first of all, I'm going to just slot the bolts through, and then you'll see these are very small, so it's difficult to see, but on the T-nuts the one surface have got these angles, okay, and that's going to slot into the aluminium extrusion like that. So make sure that you orientate these the correct way. So I'm just going to do a couple of turns on them. So you want 2 at the bottom, and you want another 2 in the slot at the top. Right, so I'm just going to try and position them more or less where I think they need to go. And then we are going to try and slot these in like that. So just sort of like slot them in. This can be a little bit tricky. So what I'm going to do now is, before I slot in the bottom ones, I'm now just going to tighten these with my Allen key. So you will see as you tighten it, the T-nut will twist into the extrusion. Well, that's not working. T-nut will twist into the extrusion into place. So I'm just, I'm not over tightening them, just a little bit, so that I can still move the extrusion up and down. Alright, and we're going to try and insert the ones at the bottom. I need to just make these a little bit looser. It's a little bit tricky. There we go. Now, right now, I'm not exactly sure where we're going to place this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold it in position like that. And then tighten one of them. And one on this side. And then at a later stage, what we're going to do, we'll come back to this process and we will align and square off the Z axis with the waste board. So just tighten them enough so that it doesn't move when we do the rest of the assembly. Right, and there you have it. So we're going to continue to build the frame for the Maker Slide router machine. We're going to start off with a base. That consists of 3 aluminum extrusions that are 940 millimeters long, and then we have 2 aluminum extrusions that are each 1 meter long. So from the profile we can see these are the 20 by 20 millimeter extrusions. So we're going to start off by laying out the 1 meter extrusions. And then we will fit the 940 millimeter extrusions in between. So we have one on that edge over there. You'll have one in the middle. And one on this edge. So you're going to end up with a square with the extrusion in the middle dividing it. Right, so together with the kit we got these little angle brackets with set screw in them, and we're going to use this to assemble the frame. So on your 940 millimeter pieces, what we can do is we're going to just slot these. We're going to slot these in to the end. All right, and I'm just going to tighten it with the Allen key just a little bit, not all the way. Like that. And we're going to do that on each end. So just flip this around. Don't worry about lining this up to the edge right now. We'll do that at a later stage. Right, so those two that I've just assembled I'm going to use for the sides. For the middle I'm going to be using this one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the one bracket on this side, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it around and put another one on the opposite. Next, we are going to mount these end plates to the extrusion frame, and this will hold the, I think it's the X or Y axis aluminum extrusions. So what we're going to need for this are 4 of these end plates. They're all the same. We're going to need these flat head machine screws. I think they might be the only ones in the pack, but they are 9 millimeters long, and we are going to need these clip spring-loaded little slot-in bolts. I don't know, or nuts. I don't know exactly what they are called, but that is what we are going to use. The reason they are spring-clipped is so you'll see we have. I actually think we're mounting them on this side, not on that side. So I'm just going to switch the frame so that we can get a better view. Right, so the reason they clip on is because you can, I think you can actually when you slot them into the track, they stay in position. I also think you can actually slot them in from the front like that, and then they'll clip into position. Right, so I'm just going to move this one across. Let's see if I can do that again. There we go. Alright, so let's find an Allen key that will fit this. Alright, so I'm going to slot. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to have the angled part of the plate, of the end plate, facing inwards. So I'm not going to tighten that. And then we want to find the other bolt, so we need to, or the other nut, so we need to move this up so that we can line up the holes. Perfect. Not over tightening it, just a little bit. I still want to be able to move it. And then what we want to do is just move this end plate right to the edge so that it's flush with aluminium extrusion. And then I'm just going to push down on it, because I think there's still a little bit of movement in here. So what happens if we push down on it, we'll be sure to get this plate perpendicular with the extrusion. Right, first one done. And then we do that with each one of the other corners. Just going to move this so that you can get a better view of what I'm doing. Slotting in the nut. There we go. End plate angled towards the inside of the frame. Make sure it's flush with the edge of the extrusion. You can use one of the other plates to do that, so just make sure that it's nice and flush with extrusion, like that. I'm going to press down on it as I secure it into place. Right, and then you're going to do exactly the same with the other two corners. To assemble the Y-axis gantries, we are going to take one of the remaining 1 meter aluminium extrusions, the maker slide extrusions, and we are going to take one of our gantry plates, and we are going to slot the extrusion or the gantry plate over the extrusion. At the moment you can see it's quite loose because we haven't adjusted the wheels yet. And then you'll see in this end plate we have 3 holes. We're going to keep the top one clear, and we're going to use the 2 bottom holes to secure this track. So you're just going to slide it in there. Try and line up the holes so that we can fit the bolt. The bolts I'm using is it's about a 20 or 21 millimeter M5 bolt. So I'm just securing that side, and then I'm going over to this side and doing exactly the same. And you can use your Allen key. I think it is the number 4 or 4 millimeter Allen key. I'm not going to tighten it all the way. I'm still going to leave a little bit of play. We're going to tighten it at a later stage once we square up the whole machine. We can go through that process just to make sure that everything is square. Otherwise our router will not cut properly. Right, that's one side done. I'm just going to go across to the other side and assemble that, and then I'll be back. So the next step is probably going to be a little bit trickier, but we have 2 remaining extrusions, maker slide extrusions, and that we we need to slot this assembly onto them. So we're just going to start with this one, and we're just going to slot it in between the wheels. There we go, it's gripping well there. And then the same with the other one, like that. Okay, so now if you can see that, so that's sliding on these 2 tracks. Okay. On this plate, you will see that we have a number of holes, and the ones that we are going to use are those 2 and these 2 that are slightly elongated slotted holes, so that we can position and space these tracks equally apart from each other. Right, so let's see how we're gonna do this. All right. So not tightening them all the way. And then I'm just going to go over to the other side and do the same. So you're going to need 8 of the 20 or 21 millimeter bolts, 4 on this side and 4 on the other side. So not going to tighten them all the way. We still need to make some adjustments like I've said before. Right. Okay, so I'm just going to tighten these ones a little bit. And then what you want to do is bring the assembly all the way to this side. And then we can tighten these a little bit more. I'm not going to over tighten them right now. We're going to take the assembly across and then do the same on this side. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can get the wheels force the track to space evenly from this side to that side. Right. And then we have it assembled, and you can see it's running smoothly. Right, so before we continue to the next step, what I'm going to do is just run the machine all the way to the edge, and we are going to just tighten these bolts. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So you'll remember that we now have a whole bunch of fixtures, bolts and nuts that's not 100% tight yet. So now that we've mounted this assembly onto the tracks, what we can do is go ahead and just tighten up those bolts so that we get a really nice square structure. So I'm just starting with the bolts that hold the that holds this assembly together. I'm not over tightening them, just enough so that they will not come loose. Now, in order to make this slide smoothly, what we need to do is just adjust the eccentric nuts that we have on the bottom here, so that the wheels will just turn. So we don't want them to be completely loose, but the wheels must be able to turn on the track without running along the track like that when you try and turn it. If that happens, then your wheels are too close together and it's too stiff, and you're going to get a assembly that doesn't want to move easily. So we don't want to put unnecessary stress on the motor or on the belt. So just check all your wheels. This one's running fine. This one's running fine. This one is loose enough. This one is maybe a little bit stiff. So we want to just adjust this eccentric nut. However, it looks like I don't have a lot of play in it. So we're just going to put it at its most optimal position. Okay, I'm just testing all the wheels. And then once that is done, we can go ahead and we can tighten all of these nuts and bolts. So you want to make sure that your eccentric nut does not move out of position when you tighten these bolts. So just make sure you keep that in position. And then you can tighten them. And you can do that with all the bolts. Of course, we have to also adjust the wheels on these side plates. And right now, when this wheel at the bottom is completely loose, it's not running on the track. This one's better, but not exactly. So what we need to do is we're going to adjust these eccentric spaces so that we have a wheel that runs tight against the track. So that was a little bit too much. I'm going to move it back. That's much better. Keeping it in place while the eccentric nut does not move. And we're going to do the same with this one. Try the wheel, still spinning. much better. Keep the eccentric nut in place. Fasten the bolt. There we go. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side.